Yeah, no, absolutely. Ransomware has been all over the news, and it's definitely a cause for concern. So, my advice, our advice would always be proactive approach to cybersecurity. Don't just read about it. Actually invest in protecting the digital assets. But for ransomware, top things that's always going to be coming up is backup, 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 backups. Making sure you have a robust backup strategy, making sure you are keeping your software up to date, training employees on the risk of phishing, social engineering, and just making sure basic cybersecurity hygiene, such as best practices, multi-factor authentication. And it'll always constantly get back to backups because at the end of the day, ransomware is essentially targeting the data, and that's typically what really gets organizations kind of in a tough spot because they may not have the most recent backup of the data, which is currently being held for ransom. Yeah, what really concerns me is the growing sophistication of the attacks. We're seeing more and more targeted and custom ransomware strains, which are specifically designed to infiltrate and compromise organization. Plus, the biggest, I think, if you just Google ransomware now, the big piece is the double exfiltration attack, where uh, attackers are not only encrypting your data, but are also threatening to release sensitive information if the ransom isn't paid. So, which really puts organizations in a difficult position, and it can be especially damaging for these organizations, especially organizations which handle sensitive data, confidential data, such as government agencies, healthcare providers, and all of these attackers are using more advanced techniques, fileless malware, living off the land attacks, which are way harder to detect and actually defend against. And attackers really know their victims, or who they're targeting, and they're increasingly targeting these high value targets like critical infrastructure, government organizations, which have serious implications for public and national security. And so, to kind of wrap it back up, is our biggest concern, my biggest concern is that all of these attackers or these ransomware trends are becoming much more sophisticated and much more challenging to fight against and defend against. Yeah, so the question of whether to pay the ransom or not is a tough one, and the ethical implications can always be complex. I understand the impulse to pay in order to regain access to the data that some folks will want to, but doing so, you're actually fueling the ransomware economy, and you're encouraging more attacks. I believe no, don't pay the ransomware. It again essential for organizations to weigh the pros and cons. You need to consider the long-term consequences, consult legal, cybersecurity professionals before making a decision. Again, it's a huge problem. It's We would always recommend not paying a ransom, and the difficult and the challenge is, for example, healthcare providers, they're the most likely organizations to actually pay the ransom because the attackers know it has a very huge impact on how the organization actually operates. And most of the time, they don't have backups of their medical records, so you can't get tests back. You have to delay procedures. You have to divert ambulances from emergency rooms, and there is a significant impact to the quality of care. And attackers know that they're going to continue to attack organizations which are more likely to pay, which they know don't practice standard cybersecurity hygiene or just basic backup hygiene, making sure latest backups are readily available. And, making into a double whammy, you go into the double exfiltration attacks or tactics. And even if you refuse to pay, that you may just say, hey, I'm going to restore everything from backup and do whatever I need to get my system back. You still have the threat that they're going to expose and sell your data. So that's the really big challenge. And even if you do pay, on the flip side, they expose your data anyway. Again, so it goes back to being a very difficult problem. And we've seen it, especially in healthcare, when you factor in the sensitivity of the data and the delivery of the care. Again, at a lot of these organizations, data is not always encrypted. And one of the, I think, I forget who said it, but there's a quote that's around ransomware, which is like, it's almost 100% of the time, if you pay the ransom, they are going to come back again. So it's decision of whether to pay a ransom is a complex one, but I believe in not paying just a ransom. Again, from an ethical standpoint, you can look at paying a ransom can actually be seen as supporting a criminal activity. And again, at the end of the day, there is no guarantee that the attackers are actually going to be providing that decryption key for you to get the data back. Yeah, no, so I think it's true that we don't hear about ransomware criminals being held accountable. And part of that problem is the challenge associated with actually identifying and prosecuting the attackers. You have to remember, they are often operating across international borders, using sophisticated techniques. They're exploiting legal loopholes. Again, law enforcement agencies worldwide are working together more closely than ever to actually track down and prosecute these cyber criminals. So we can definitely hope for progress in the area, but going back to holding these cyber criminals accountable for ransomware attacks are challenging because, as I mentioned, they are typically operating from countries that have weak or almost non-existent cybercrime laws. And, just being able to function over the internet, potentially through multiple different means, makes it very challenging and difficult to actually nail down and identify the individuals. But law enforcement are working, and in the past that they have prosecuted cyber criminals in the past. And I believe in 2020, DOJ charged 2 Iranian nationals in connection with a ransomware attack by working together with the jurisdictions and City of Atlanta. But again, that's City of Atlanta, and it's just challenging. Yeah, so if you were to suffer a ransomware attack today, the first step would be to contain the incident, isolate the system, the machines, and workstations, and obviously we want to prevent the spread of the malware. Then we would want to work on identifying the specific type of variant the ransomware may be, assessing the damage. Definitely be looking into indicators of compromise. We want to be focusing on recovery, which would include restoring from backups. We make copious backups here, and decrypting files, especially if we encrypt all of our files and we have a full key management process, and checking out and retrieving keys as necessary, and obviously focusing on strengthening our defenses to prevent future attacks. Communication and transparency is very critical, and recovering from a ransomware attack requires a multifaceted approach that includes both technical and non-technical measures. If we are looking into just from a legal standpoint, understanding what our ramifications are, from a technical standpoint, implementing, identifying indicators of compromise, being able to actually assess appropriately the extent of damage and determine what the best course of action may be. But at the end of the day, restoring from backups, and the backups, at the end of the day, ransomware is always typically targeting data. So we're very cognizant of what threat actors are going to be looking for. So we make sure, all of our critical infrastructure and critical assets are consistently backed up, and we have proper security controls in place. Yeah, no, so absolutely. So, while at initial blush, it may seem like it's true that resources aren't available and learning to reverse engineer or dissect the ransomware is readily available. Partly is because that's a very specialized, highly specialized skill set. And there's also a concern to providing this type of knowledge could actually potentially be misused by malicious actors. However, going back to ethics, I do believe that fostering a community of ethical security researchers is essential and critical for combating these type of threats. The more we understand about ransomware, the better equipped we'll be to actually defend against it. But at the same side, on the flip side, you look hard enough on Google, you can find methods and techniques, and you can learn to reverse engineer and dissect these malwares and services. A lot of the more cool and sexy word is hackers. And at the end of the day, reverse engineering is a big component of being a really good penetration tester, being a really good red team pen tester, even being able to defend just pen testing in general. If you're a really good one, you have these pen testers that are setting up labs in their home and kind of reverse engineering services. And for example, we have pen testing labs and we have pen testers, and we had an individual that actually took a replica environment, recreate an environment and reverse engineer to try to exploit and dissect actual malware. And that malware could be ransomware. But again, going back, it's a very challenging and very talented individuals will work to kind of be really good at it. The other challenge is attackers are constantly evolving the techniques, which is making it very difficult to keep up with the latest threats. And ransomware in particular is actually designed to be very difficult to reverse engineer or analyze. A lot of these many new strains are using advanced authentication and anti-debugging techniques to actually make analysis more challenging and more difficult. And so it's a combination of things, but learning engineering, reverse engineering, and dissecting ransomware, I wouldn't say it's not readily available. It's, if you look hard enough, you'll definitely find what you're looking for. Yeah, sure. Learn the importance of thinking like an attacker to better defend against threats like ransomware. Understand tools, techniques, tactics that are employed and used by the cyber criminals is very critical in developing an effective security posture. The training emphasized the significance of a proactive approach, which again goes back to regular testing and updating the security controls, maintaining strong backups. Again, key for ransomware is going to be backups a lot of the times, and going into, at the end of the day, fostering a culture of security awareness, not just for yourself, not just for your peers, but for your entire organization.